So it's really keeping in mind, especially for healthcare professionals, is in spotting signs and really honing in on the fact that it's all of our responsibilities to be looking out for the signs of sexual violence and sexual abuse. I think that's especially true with children and young people. I think it's time to flip the narrative that we should be expecting children and young people to tell adults about abuse. It's our responsibility as adults to be looking out for those signs and spotting physical clues, bruising, loss of weight, gaining weight, emotional clues, being unhappy or distressed a lot of the time, trauma representing behaviour. So if someone's gone through trauma, especially if they're a young person, a teenager, that could be presented as normal teenage behaviour to lots of people, but it's important to see that as a clue in itself. So a young person who's being very moody or being very difficult to engage with, not dismissing that as typical teenage behaviour, I think is quite important. Being able to look past why is that young person presenting in this way? Have they gone through trauma? Are they being abused? Just asking those questions and keeping that at the forefront of your mind. And it's important that when you do spot those signs and when you do start to have an inkling of something possibly going on behind the scenes, that's not ignored. You always have to act on that. That information can't just go nowhere. And being able to build a relationship with a child or young person in order to present yourself as an adult that they can trust. This may be the 20th healthcare professional or 20th institution staff member that they've met with in the last couple of months. And if you're the person who spots something that's going wrong, even if a disclosure doesn't come of that, that's so meaningful for the child or young person just to even recognise that something's going on and something's not quite right, and not just writing that off as another appointment, I think is really important.
In terms of spotting signs of abuse, that it can be very difficult. And I think at the moment, probably as adults, we put too much emphasis on children being able to express the horror of what they've been through. And we rely on children being able to, A, understand that is abuse, B, know how to convey what they have been through and put that into words, and then C, find the right person to tell. And all of those are quite a lot of responsibility on children and young people. And I think whilst it's important that we give children and young people some tools to understand what is a safe relationship, body awareness, all of that's really important, but it shouldn't be in isolation. And what we should be doing as adults and as professionals is equipping ourselves better with the right skills and confidence to have those difficult conversations with children. So to be able to speak to them about safe relationships, consent, what health means, good touch, bad touch, and about asking some difficult questions if we notice a child isn't quite themselves or is presenting with some behaviours that might seem out of the ordinary or that we're a little bit concerned about. We need to be better able to ask questions about what that might be, rather than labelling them as naughty or as having various issues.
We talk a lot about the voice of the child, so it's really important that people talk to children. From where we've spoken to survivors or heard survivors speak, the one thing that comes out fairly consistently is that they wish someone had asked the question. So we do talk about not only professional curiosity, but even as a parent or carer or as a community member, there's nothing wrong with asking the question, are you okay? Why has this happened? If you think that something is happening, actually talking to the child is where you're most likely to get the information. Now, we know that children don't disclose this type of abuse readily or easily. They're highly unlikely to volunteer this information. There's a number of reasons for that. Partly, they might not recognise at this point that they are being abused or there's any form of abuse happening. They might think that they are consenting. They might think that they are in a consensual relationship. And it's the role of the professionals and the adults to try and help them to identify the abusive elements and really help them to understand where the exploitation and the abuse is coming into that. It might be that there are feelings of shame or guilt or even complicitness within that abuse. So if they've accepted something, if they've accepted drugs and alcohol, if they've accepted gifts, if they've accepted a place to stay for the night, they may feel like they are some way to blame for the abuse that's then happened to them. There could be other issues around feeling embarrassed, or that they are going to be disowned by family. So some of these issues around forced marriage or so-called honour-based violence could be a particular issue for some young people in terms of disclosure. So there's lots of issues around why young people won't disclose, particularly if we're not asking them, particularly if we're not building that trusting relationship with them and helping them to feel that they're in a safe place where they can tell us what's happening. And I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I'd just like to say about the voice of the child is that we shouldn't just be listening to what the child is saying, but there are many other ways that children can communicate what's happening to them. So we need to understand the child within their context. We need to look at what their behaviour is telling us and not just listen to what their voice is saying as well.
We leave children to learn about sex through pornography and their peers, and sometimes we do a big disservice to children with that, but actually we also need to equip adults much better about just talking to children generally about abuse, about what that is, and creating more noise around it, because abuse happens in silence, and the more we silence ourselves in having those conversations, the more difficult it is for children who've been through those experiences to actually find their voice.